What's up, everyone? Imagine waking up one day not in your own bed, but on the cold steppes of Mongolia, right beside a young boy named Temujin, the future Genghis Khan. No phones, no Wi-Fi, just tribes, betrayals, and a brutal fight for survival. That's exactly what happens to you. A modern human suddenly trapped in the body of a nomadic warrior, growing up as Temujin's closest companion, from exile to empire, from blood feuds to battlefield domination, you witness it all. Can you survive in a world where loyalty is rare, enemies are everywhere, and only the ruthless rise? Or better, yet can you change history itself? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell, because this is one wild ride through history you do not want to miss. Let's start. Did you feel that? The wind across your face. Sharp, dry, unforgiving. You're not in your world anymore. This is the Mongol steppe, and the air here carries no softness. It bites like teeth. The land is endless, treeless, cold, and silent. Until the horses gallop, you're standing next to me now. But back then, I was just a boy. Just like him. Just like Temujin, before he was Genghis Khan. He was nothing, no tents, no guards, no food. Just a boy with a dying fire and a mother too proud to cry. I remember it clearly, the day his father was killed, poisoned by enemies who smiled with their mouths and stabbed with their tea. When his tribe found out, they didn't weep, they simply left, took the horses, the weapons, the honor, and abandoned the family in the wilderness. Most said they wouldn't survive the week. But Temujin did. He didn't cry, he didn't beg, he just stared. That same stare you'll come to know. Eyes like frozen iron. Even back then, he had it. I first saw him hunting alone, barefoot, no arrows, just a rope and his hands. I was with my father then, a blacksmith for another camp nearby. We watched him crouch by the river and pull a fish straight from the ice. My father scoffed. That boy will die before the snow melts. But I didn't believe it, not for a second. Temujin wasn't born to die. He was born to fight the sky itself. One night, we brought meat to his family. Out of pity, maybe, or fear of ghosts. But Temujin didn't say thank you. He looked me in the eyes and said, "If I rise, you rise with me?" He was only 10. I didn't laugh. I nodded. And that's when I became his shadow. Time passed. The boy grew lean, fast, ruthless. His hands were always cut. His eyes never blinked. He didn't just survive. He hunted. When his younger brother stole from the family's last bag of flour, Temujin didn't just scold him. He struck him down cold. Yes, but in Temujin's mind, justice meant survival. Fairness meant order. Even at the cost of blood, others feared him. I followed him. Because somehow, I knew he wasn't building a life. He was building a storm. Years later, I rode with him to rescue Bort, the only woman he ever loved. Bandits had taken her. A rival tribe held her like a prize. We had 6 men. They had 50. It didn't matter. Temujin moved like lightning. No battle cries, no mercy. I still remember the sound of hooves on dirt, arrows in air, and the way Bort screamed when she saw him through the firelight. That night, I saw him cry, not for the blood, but because love had returned to him, and for a moment, the world made sense again. People started whispering. Temujin, they said, was different. He didn't care for bloodlines. He raised men by loyalty, not birth. He shared spoils fairly. He punished the cruel. He honored the brave, and more. They began to follow him, not out of fear, but because he gave them something they hadn't felt before. A future. One night, by a quiet fire, I asked him, "Why do you fight so hard?" He didn't answer right away, just stared into the flames then. He whispered, "So no child eats dirt, so no woman is taken, so no man is powerless again." That's when I stopped serving the boy and started serving the vision. The day he became Khan. It wasn't with trumpets or banners. It was with blood. The Tartars had betrayed him again. Temujin gathered every outcast, every broken warrior, every tribe willing to risk everything. Even men who once fought against us now fought beside us. We rode under black skies and red fire. The battle was brutal, dust, screams, steel, all of it spinning. When it ended, the Tartars were ash. Temujin stood on a hill, face bloodied, eyes shining. One by one, the warriors knelt. I knelt last, because I had seen it all. From the dirt to the thunder, that boy, that cold-eyed hunter in the snow, had become a storm, and the storm had a name now, Genghis Khan and me. I was his right hand, his sword, his shadow, and this is how it all began. The wind is colder at night, not just because the stars burn high and cruel above the steppe, but because that's when the wolves come. I remember those nights, huddled, near Temujin's fire, when we weren't much different from the animals themselves. We were outcasts, scattered, poor, surviving on boiled roots, horse blood, and the bones of frozen deer. No tribe, no banner, just a dream wrapped in silence. And yet, somehow, even then, there was something different in Temujin. He never feared the wolves, he studied them. You see that? He said once, pointing toward the black horizon where their howls began. They hunt as one. They feed the cubs before themselves, kill the weak to protect the strong. I nodded. I had no idea what he meant, but I'd learn we all would. Temujin didn't build an army. He built a pack. He didn't take men by bloodline. He chose them by strength, by loyalty, by hunger. One by one, the broken came. Warriors who had been cast aside, sons of fallen chieftains, escaped slaves, widowed riders, even bandits. Not many, just enough. And among them came Jamuka. His name may not mean much now, but once, he was everything. Jamuka was Temujin's Anda, his sworn blood brother. They drank the same milk as children, swore the same oaths beneath the open sky, carved their names into the same tree with bone knives. And when Jamuka rode into our camp, tall and proud on a silver mare, it was like watching the moon return to the earth. They embraced as brothers, laughed like boys again. For a time, we were unstoppable. We raided small camps, not for glory, but for survival. We didn't take lives unless forced. We stole food, freed slaves, shattered the walls of men who had once laughed at Temujin's name. And we gave what we took to the women, the children, the hungry, not just our own, but anyone who followed us. Temujin's rules were simple. Do not steal from your brother. Do not strike the weak. Obey the Khan, or leave the fire. At first, people scoffed. Who was this boy to give orders like a king? But when they saw how he punished even his favorites, how he struck down a man who tried to rape a captured woman, how he shared meat equally, even when his own belly was empty, the laughter stopped. Respect was born. Then came the Kurultai, the great meeting of chieftains. We rode to the plains with only 40 men. Jamuka brought 200. Most of the other tribal leaders ignored Temujin, speaking only to Jamuka, offering gifts, calling him the true heir of the steppes. But Temujin didn't flinch. He walked into the circle, bare-chested, wind cutting through his hair, and spoke one word: unity. They didn't understand it then, but he wasn't just calling for loyalty. He was calling for rebirth. Later that night, as the fires burned and fermented, Mare's milk flowed like rivers. I stood watch while Temujin and Jamuka drank together. I watched Jamuka lean in close, whispering something with a half-smile. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Temujin's jaw clench, and I knew, right then, that the bond had frayed. Weeks passed, our camp grew. We had 50 men, and 100. Families came, craftsmen, herders, even priests. We dug wells. We built stone circles. We had laws, order, purpose, and for the first time, A flag, Temujin called it the Sald, his spirit banner made from the hairs of his best stallion. It flapped in the wind like a living thing, black, fierce, free. "I will not be like the old Khans," he told me one night. "They feast, Wallo. Their people starve. They trade daughters like cattle. No more." And I believed him. I always believed him. Then came the wolves. Not the kind that walk on four legs, but the ones with banners and spears. A minor chief, jealous of Temujin's growing influence, marched on us with 60 warriors. He thought we were still weak. He was wrong. Temujin had trained us in secret drilling formations. Signals, ambush tactics. He had learned from every defeat, every betrayal. When the enemy rode in, they found themselves surrounded before they'd even dismounted. Temujin gave one warning: lay down your weapons or die. Most laughed. An hour. Later, none were left alive. But that battle did something else. It woke Jamuka. He returned with smiles and praise. But I saw the shift, the way he watched Temujin now, with caution, not warmth. He had always believed he was the star, the chosen, the heir to the steppes. Now Temujin was rising, faster, louder, with more followers every day. And Jamuka? He saw what we all did. The wolves were choosing a new leader. One night, Jamuka called a private council. He invited Temujin. I begged him not to go, but Temujin only smiled. Better to face the storm than wait for it. He rode alone. I waited. All night, when he returned, his knuckles were bloodied, his eyes hollow. "He's no longer my brother," he said. That was all. The next day, the world split. Half of our warriors rode east with Temujin. The others, loyal to Jamuka's bloodline, vanished into the plains. The end of bond was broken. Brotherhood became rivalry, and deep inside, I felt the wind change. It didn't howl anymore. It waited. One morning as we broke camp, I asked Temujin, "Do you think he'll strike soon?" He didn't answer, just stared at the horizon, where the grass waved like blades in an unseen war. "Wolves don't howl before they bite," he said. Then he mounted his horse, and we rode on, not as a family, not even as a tribe, but as something else, something forming, hardening, a shadow among wolves, a storm waiting to be born. Have you ever seen a yurt collapse in silence? No fire, no fighting, just emptiness. That's what we found when we returned. Nothing. No smoke from the hearth, no laughter from the children, just cold wind slipping through torn felt. Dragging our memories out into the snow, Temujin stopped. His horse without a word. He stared at the remains of his home, the place he had built for her. For Bort, I could feel something rising inside him. Not rage, not grief, something colder. We rode hard for hours, searching for tracks. I knew what he feared but would not say. The Merkits had done this. A tribe that once called Temujin's father an enemy. They had never forgotten, never forgiven. And now they had returned, not to kill, but to humiliate, to take what mattered most. Bort wasn't just his wife. She was the thread that held him together. She had chosen Temujin when others offered her noble sons and golden promises. She believed in him when he was nothing. She rode beside him when we had no tribe, no future. And now she was gone, taken like a prize. Temujin didn't speak for 2 days. We camped by a frozen stream, horses tied loosely, men whispering they had seen him furious before, in battle, in betrayal, but this was different. He sat by the fire, sharpening a knife he didn't need, hands steady, eyes distant. I approached quietly. "We'll get her back," I said. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw it. Fear. Not for himself, for her. She was screaming, he said, and I wasn't there. He'd gathered us the next morning, all 30 of us, 30 against hundreds. "Anyone who wishes to leave," he said, "may do so without shame." No one moved. because this wasn't just about Bort anymore. This was about who Temujin was, who we were. He turned to me. Ride to Togrul. Ask him for aid. Togrul, the Khan of the Carrots, an old ally of Temujin's father, a warlord with power, men and ambition. I rode hard, day and night. My horse nearly collapsed beneath me. When I finally found Togrul's camp, his guards blocked my path, dropped to one knee. My Khan requests your strength. Togrul emerged from his tent, a tall man wrapped in fur, his face weathered and unreadable. Temujin, he said. The boy? He's no boy now, I replied, and he's hunting merkets. The silence that followed was long. Then Togrul smiled. Good. He sent 200 riders. Temujin met them with silent gratitude. We struck at dawn. The merkets had no idea what was coming. They thought they had taken a wife, not started a war. We surrounded their camp like wolves in fog. No horns, no shouting, just movement, blades, and breath. I followed Temujin through the smoke. I saw him cut down 3 men without pausing. He didn't scream. He didn't speak. He just moved like a storm looking for its eye, and then I heard her. Temujin. He turned through the fire, through the chaos. There she was, Bort, her clothes torn, face bruised, but standing alive. He ran to her, dropped his weapon, held her like the world had stopped burning. Later, we built her a new yurt, not grand, not gold, but solid, safe. She didn't speak much for weeks. Neither did he, but every night they sat together. He never let her out of his sight again. The raid made ripples across the steppe. A small band, aided by a powerful Khan, had defied tradition, had punished a tribe for taking a woman. To some, it was madness. To others, it was justice. To us, it was everything. Temujin changed after that. He began speaking of law more often, of unity, of a land where no bride could be stolen, no home destroyed without cause, a world where women ride freely, he said, where no family sleeps in fear. It was the first time I realized something. Temujin wasn't just building a nation. He was building a shield, not for himself, for everyone broken like he had once been. A month later, I asked him, "Do you forgive them?" He looked at the horizon, where the wind was already changing. "No," he said, "but I'll outlive their memory." And that was the end of it. Bort never spoke of what happened among the merkets. She didn't need to. We all knew, but what mattered? More, she came back not as a victim, but as a flame, quiet, steady, unbroken. She stood beside Temujin as he rose, not behind him, beside him, and the men saw that. The women saw that. They began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world could be more than ashes and screams. It could be rebuilt. That winter, our fires burned brighter. The wolves still howled, but we were louder now. And beneath the stars, a man and a woman sat in silence, planning a storm. Some bonds break in fire, others in silence. Temujin and Jamuka, brothers not by blood, but by oath, were once inseparable. Two sides of the same blade. When they rode together, it felt like thunder across the sky. But thunder always fades, and when it does, only the cracks remain. At first, the tension was easy to ignore. We had food, we had horses, we had purpose. Jamuka still visited Temujin's camp from time to time. He brought gifts, laughed around the fire, drank deep into the night with old friends. But underneath the smiles, I saw it, a shadow, a shift. He watched us closely, too closely. His eyes didn't wander like before. They measured. He spoke of tradition, of noble lines, of how the world had always been. And Temujin? He just listened, until one night, after Jamuka had gone, Temujin looked at me and said, "He thinks we're playing the same game." But we weren't. Temujin wasn't playing at all. He was rewriting the board. Word had spread that Temujin rewarded. loyalty over lineage, that a blacksmith's son could ride beside a chieftain if his heart was strong, that women could speak in councils, that orphans could find a home under his banner. To many, this was blasphemy. To the forgotten, it was salvation. Every week, more came, riders from fallen clans, widows with sons, slaves who'd broken free, poor men, dreamers, fighters with no flag. They didn't come for gold. They came for hope. And in the center of it all stood Temujin, not dressed. In silk, not seated on a throne, but on the ground with his people, his sleeves rolled, his hands stained like theirs. The more he grew, the more Jamuka scowled. Then came the line, the invisible one that separates friends from rivals. It came when a noble family from the Jadaran tribe, once loyal to Jamuka, pledged themselves to Temujin. Their sons knelt, their horses branded, their women woven into our camp like blood. Jamuka sent a message the next day. Do not take what was mine, or I will take back more than you ever owned. Temujin didn't respond, not in words, but we moved camp the next morning closer to the Annan River, into fertile lands the tribes called sacred. It was a challenge, and Jamuka accepted. He came with 10,000 warriors, flying light banners of noble bloodlines and ancestral pride. We had less than half then, farmers, hunters, former slaves, young men who'd never swung a sword in true battle. But Temujin didn't tremble. He called every man forward, and under the open sky, he made his first true speech as a leader of nations. No man among you was born with silver in his mouth. No one gave you land, no one gave you peace. You took what life gave you and survived. Now it's time to rise higher than survival today. We do not fight for revenge. We do not fight for gold. We fight because if we fall, there will never be another chance for men like us to stand. He held up the black sword, his spirit banner. We are the wind. We are the dust. We are the storm that will never bow. The cheers shook the sky. Even I, who had followed him through ash and ice, felt something deeper that day, like fire in my bones. The next morning, we met Jamuka's army near the banks of the Annan. I remembered the stillness before the charge, how even the birds stopped singing. Our lines were tight. Temujin had trained us relentlessly. Ambushes, signals, decoys. He placed his most disciplined units in front. Hidden behind a hill, he left a flank of fresh horses with riders ready to sweep. I was at his side, not leading, but watching, waiting. Then, the horn blew chaos, hooves pounding like war drums, arrows raining from the sky, screams, metal on bone, flesh on mud. Our men fought with desperation, with hunger. They didn't have bloodlines, they had grit. For a while, it worked. We pushed them back. Jamuka's elite were stunned by the ferocity of our assault. But then came his counterattack. He unleashed his heavy cavalry, nobles trained since childhood to kill. Armored and disciplined, they tore through. Our left flank, I saw boys die with knives in hand and fire in their eyes. One of them looked just like my younger brother. Temujin roared. Not words, just sound, fury, grief. He charged straight into the heart of Jamuka's line with 20 men. I followed. I had to. For a brief moment, it felt like we could turn the tide. But numbers do not lie. We lost. Temujin fell back under cover of dusk. We carried the wounded, buried the dead, left no banners behind. He sat alone that night, blood drying on his chest, his hands shaking. I approached, expecting rage, but he just said, I was wrong. That startled me more than any defeat. I thought hearts were enough, he whispered. But we need more. Discipline, unity, not just fire, structure. He didn't sleep that night. By morning, he had drawn plans in the dirt for a new army. Not just warriors, but ranks. Officers, rotations, standards, order from chaos. The loss had taught him more than 1,000 victories. And Jamuka? He celebrated with executions. Captured men from our side were boiled alive. Their screams sent like smoke across the plains. It was cruelty, and that cruelty turned more tribes toward Temujin, slowly, quietly, like rivers changing course, because Jamuka had won a battle, but Temujin was building a world years later. When the empire was vast and the mountains bowed before our hooves, I asked him, "Do you still think of him?" He nodded, every day. Then he added, "Some wolves hunt with you. Others will always be waiting in the dark." And I understood. Some brothers are not meant to walk the same road forever. Some are meant to break, so a nation can rise. Some battles are won by strategy, some by courage, but this one would be won by the will to bleed longer than the other man. We had rebuilt. Since the day Jamuka shattered our ranks near the Annan River, we had grown again, not just in number, but in purpose. Temujin changed everything. He stopped. Calling us a tribe, we were now a nation. He gave structure to the chaos. 10 men followed one commander. 10 commanders followed 100 chief. Every soldier knew their place, not because of birth, but by fire-tested merit. Even the sons of lords bowed to men they once would have spat on, because under Temujin, respect wasn't given. It was earned. Still, the steppe whispered Jamuka's name, though he'd won the last battle. Something had broken in him. Maybe it was the way we survived. Maybe it was how his own men began to question the boiling pots. The cruelty, the pride, whatever it was. He began to lose followers, and we began to gain them. When word came that Jamuka was gathering an army again, Temujin called his first. True Kurultai, not of nobles, but of equals. They came in the hundreds, riders from the Aralads, scouts from the Anjarat, even defectors from Jamuka's own tribes. They sat on the open plains, no tents, no thrones. Temujin stood before them in leather and iron, dust still in his beard from the morning patrol. He didn't ask for loyalty. He gave it first. "I will bleed before you do," he said. "I will eat last. I will sleep cold if it means your children. Wake warm." And then he asked the question, "Will you fight with me?" The answer was thunder. By spring, we had 20,000 men. Jamuka had 30,000. We met on the Kalka River, where the wind never stops, and the grass stands like a sea. The night before battle, Temujin walked among the men. He didn't rest, he didn't pray. He asked every unit, one by one, what they needed. Some asked for water, some for arrows. One boy asked for his father's knife, lost in a raid 2 years earlier. Temujin had kept it, wrapped in wool, hidden. In his saddlebag, he gave it back. That boy fought like 10 men the next day. Dawn came silent. Then the drums began, not from us, from Jamuka. They beat like a heartbeat, slow, confident, terrifying. Temujin watched from a hill, arms crossed. He turned to us and said, "This will not be a battle. It will be a rebirth." Our army moved like a beast with 1,000 legs. I rode with the right flank, overseeing archers trained to fire from horseback, something our enemies had mocked until they started dying by the hundreds. Jamuka's army was older, nobler. Thicker in armor, they fought in blocks, relying on sheer strength and reputation. But Temujin, he made us into wind. We faked retreats, drew them into traps, cut off supply lines, broke their momentum before their blades could taste skin. Still, they pushed, the center buckled. Our left almost collapsed, but Temujin held firm. He charged directly into the enemy's elite, not with the largest unit, but with the fastest, and that was the trick. He didn't aim to break them. He aimed to confuse them. Dust rose, lines blurred, and in the heart of the chaos, Jamuka himself entered the field. I saw him, tall, regal, golden armor flashing like the sun. His standard flew above him, a twin eagle stitched in silver, once a symbol of our childhood bond, now a reminder of the enemy he had become. He cut through 3. Of our men, wounded a fourth. Temujin rode to meet him, not for a duel. No, this was no poem, no legend. They were warlords now, not brothers. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They just fought. I couldn't reach them. Too many riders between us. But I saw it happen. Jamuka struck first. A wide arc meant to disarm. Temujin ducked, countered. With a short thrust, missed, they circled. Blades screamed against each other. And then, Temujin kicked Jamuka's horse from under him. The noble warrior hit the ground like thunder. His men rushed to pull him out, but the spell had broken. His line wavered, faltered. Temujin didn't pursue. He let them retreat. He didn't want their bones. He wanted their loyalty. When the battle ended, the grass was red, but so was the sky. A new sun had risen. Jamuka fled with a handful of guards. For months, he vanished into the mountains. Some said he died in exile. Others said he plotted in secret. But Temujin never sent men to hunt him. He simply said, if he returns, let him return a man, not a ghost. That victory changed everything. Tribes that had wavered now pledged without hesitation. The word Khan was no longer whispered. It was shouted. Temujin was no longer just a man with a cause. He was the cause. That night, we burned the banners of our enemies, but we didn't celebrate. Too many had died. Temujin stood before the fire. Eyes fixed on the flames, I stepped beside him. You won, I said. He shook his head. We all did, or none of this means anything. And I realized something. This was never about revenge. It wasn't even about power. It was about making sure no boy ever grew up in the ashes like he did. That no fire would burn unchecked. That no man would kneel unless he chose to. So we buried the dead, we stitched our wounds, and under a blood-red sky, we rode again. Not toward peace, but toward destiny. After the battle, the grass grew back red. Blood soaks the steppe deep, but the wind moves on. The crows stop circling, and the living are left behind to ask, now what? We had won. Jamuka was gone, his army shattered, his name reduced to a ghost that stalked the fringes of our fires. And yet, victory was only the beginning. Temujin no longer spoke of raids or enemies. He spoke of order. He gathered us, the commanders, the elders, even women who led their families, and he spoke beneath the open sky. We have fought like wolves. Now we must live like men. The world we came from was chaos. Every tribe had its own customs, its own gods, its own punishments. One clan might forgive theft. Another would tear off a hand. There was no unity, only survival. But Temujin had a different vision. The law, he said, must be above the Khan, or the Khan becomes a tyrant. That was the day the Yasa was born. It wasn't written on paper, not yet. It was burned into memory, into stories, into practice. And it was simple. 10 men would answer for one. One would answer for 10 if a soldier disobeyed. His commander shared the punishment. If a commander failed, his soldiers paid the price. It wasn't cruelty. It was balance. Temujin believed in shared responsibility. Like a yurt, if one beam collapses, the whole tent falls. The new laws came like thunder. No theft, not even from enemies after battle, unless divided fairly. No taking women by force. Any man who did would be executed without trial. No betrayal. Among brothers, to abandon your band in battle was the same as murder. No noble blood above common blood. All crimes punished the same. At first, some resisted. A merchant tried to bribe an officer. Temujin hung him in front of his own caravan. A warrior beat his wife and claimed it was his right. Temujin sent her to lead his guards and sent him to dig graves until his back broke. Soon, people understood. This was no longer the wild steppe. This was something new, a nation. He didn't stop with laws. He reorganized the entire world beneath him. Every family belonged to an arban, A unit of 10. 10 Arbans made a Zuan. 10 Zuans made a Mingen. 10 Mingens made a Tummen. 10,000 strong. You were loyal not to your bloodline, but your unit. If your brother died, you took in his widow and children. No questions, no pity, just honor. It was discipline like the steppe had never seen. I remember watching a drunk noble protest. You cannot treat me like a herder. Temujin replied, and earn more than the herder. He wasn't cruel, but he was just. And justice, in his hands, was sharp as steel. We camped near the Black Forest for a season, not raiding, not expanding, but building. For the first time, we had peace. Temujin held councils every week. Any man could speak, from warlords to goat herders. Sometimes the meetings went on for hours. Sometimes he sat silently and just listened. Bort was always nearby, not in the shadows, beside him. Quiet but powerful, and I stood behind him, sword in hand, always watching. Not for enemies, but for history. Because I knew something was happening here that would outlive all of us one night. By the fire, he turned to me. You know what the strongest law is? I shook my head. He held up a single arrow, snapped it, then held up a bundle of 10, tried and failed to break them. Unity, he said. That's the law above all others. Word spread across the steppe. Temujin's land was different. Merchants traveled in safety, thieves disappeared, orphans were fed, disputes were settled not with blades, but with arbitration. Even the gods, it seemed, began to take notice. Shamans who once served tribal chiefs now came to him, offering prayers not just for war, but for wisdom. He accepted them, but kept them at a distance. Let no man say the sky speaks only to him. He warned the other tribes, watching from afar, began to make choices. Some bent the knee, others whispered rebellion. A few still followed Jamuka's memory, scattered and bitter. But Temujin didn't seek vengeance. He sought unity. He sent emissaries to every tribe, carrying 2 items, a cup of fermented Mare's milk, and a sword, drink, and you join the nation. Refuse, and you face the blade. Simple. And in the language of the steppe, clarity was power. Not all chose peace, but more did than he expected, because even his enemies could see what was forming. Not just a kingdom, a new world, and in the center of it all, beneath the stars, beneath the winds, beneath the endless sky, stood the man who had once been a boy in the ashes. He wasn't crowned yet. He wore no jewels, held no throne, but he ruled more than territory. He ruled order, and order, as it turns out, is more dangerous than any sword. The steppe had gone quiet, not with fear, with waiting, like the wind had paused, like the stars were holding their breath, like the earth itself knew that something was about to change forever. And it did, because that was the day. He became Genghis Khan. The great Kurultai, the gathering of all tribes, hadn't happened in years. Not like this. From every edge of the steppe they came, golden tents of the Carrots, wolf banners of the Tay Shiyud. Even old enemies now rode alongside us, there. Swords lowered, their pride swallowed. Thousands camped near the Annan River. Men who had once tried to kill Temujin now came with gifts. Others came out of awe. A few came out of fear, but all of them came. The ceremony was not what you think. There were no gold thrones, no crowns dripping with rubies, no priests in feathered robes. Temujin stood barefoot on the earth, wearing the same tunic he had worn during our last campaign. He held no weapon, only silence. One by one, the tribes spoke. Some told tales of his victories, over the Merkits, over Jamuka, over the wilderness itself. Others praised his laws, how his yasa had brought peace to the trade routes, how even the poorest could find justice under his rule. And then, one elder, blind in both eyes, voice cracking with age, stepped forward. He raised a hand and said, "There is no other." This is the Khan, not of a tribe, but of all tribes. And the earth shook with the chant, Khan, Khan, Khan. Not a Khan, the Khan. Genghis, it meant universal ruler. And I knelt last because I had seen it all. The starving boy by a frozen river, the ghost of a man with his wife stolen, the warlord who bled for a dream. And now I saw something else. A legend born in real time. After the chants faded, he spoke, and what he said was not a boast. It was a promise. I will not rule by fear. I will not rule for my sons. I will rule for the broken, for those with no tribes, for the lost, the stepped on, the invisible. He looked out at the crowd. You will not kneel again, unless by your own will. That night, the fires burned higher than they ever had. But Temujin, Genghis Khan now, did not feast. He sat alone, polishing his sword, watching the stars. I approached, as I always did. You should celebrate? I said. He shook his head. We haven't won yet. He was right. This was not the end of the journey. It was the starting gun. The next morning, he assembled his generals. We stood in a circle. Warriors from every corner of the steppe. Men who had once called each other enemies, now wearing the same braid in their horsehair, the same iron rings. On their thumbs, he laid out his vision. It was unlike anything we'd imagined. The tribes are united, but the world is not. There are cities beyond these hills, empires behind those rivers. They think we are dust, wind, chaos. They are wrong. He ordered maps drawn, not just of our lands, but of those beyond. The Western Shia, the Jin dynasty, the cities of the Silk Road, the merchant routes of Persia, the mountains beyond Samarkand. He was already looking past the steppe, past revenge, past tradition. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a visionary. He created a bodyguard, the Keshig, made up of warriors from every tribe, not to protect him from enemies, but to prove that loyalty meant more than lineage. He expanded the messenger system, fast riders stationed across the land, so orders could reach 1,000 miles in days. He opened the tent of power to anyone brave enough to step forward, no matter their blood, and the people responded. They didn't just follow him, they believed in him. But belief, as we would learn, does not stop arrows. The Western Shah refused to bow. The Jin dynasty mocked our Barian army. Cities along the Silk Road closed their gates, so Genghis Khan sharpened his blades before we rode out. I stood beside him as he watched the sun rise. You're not the same man you were, I said. He didn't answer right away. Then he whispered, no, but the boy in the snow still walks behind me every time I hesitate. He reminds me, and I understood he had become Genghis Khan, but inside there would always be Temujin, the boy who starved beside a dead fire, the son who was abandoned, the hunter who once caught a fish with his bare hands and refused to die. And that boy had never stopped marching. We mounted our horses, flags rose, drums beat like the sky cracking open. The Khan rode at the front, and I, his shadow, followed as always. To the west lay kingdoms, to the east, doubt, and ahead, a storm, but this time it had a name, Genghis Khan. The desert does not scream, it whispers, soft, patient, eternal, and in the stillness of the sand, it asks a question that breaks empires. Do you belong here? We didn't, not at first, but Genghis Khan came to make the desert remember his name. The kingdom of Western Shia had stood for centuries, nestled between mountains and sand, rich with trade, silk, and stone fortresses that reached toward the sun. They looked at our banners and laughed. Steppe nomads, they called us. Savages with no cities, no gods, no walls. Temujin didn't care. He didn't want their walls. He wanted their respect. And if not respect, then their submission. So we rode, southwest, through the Gobi. It felt like a grave. The sand stung like ash. The air stole the moisture from your mouth. Men who survived dozen winters on the Mongol steppe began coughing blood under the desert sun. Even the horses wilted. But Genghis, he did not falter. He led from the front, as always. No shade, no fanfare, just grit. Every time a man fell from exhaustion, he was lifted. Every time a horse collapsed, its rider walked. There were no complaints, only movement, because if the Khan walked, so did we. By the time we reached the borders of Western Shai, we were more ghost than army, but ghosts don't knock. We surrounded Valakai fortress at dusk. Their walls were thick, their archers many. Their gates did not open. Until Genghis ordered the sky to fall, we didn't use brute force, we used fear. We cut off water lines, diverted rivers, sent captured scouts back to their cities missing their tongues, set small fires at night to make them believe we had 5 times our numbers. They sent out riders to ask for terms. The Khan's answer? Kneel or vanish. They refused, so we vanished, pulled back into the sands, left only empty camps and smoldering fires. The defenders cheered. That night, they opened their gates to celebrate, and we returned. From the shadows, from beneath the dunes, we climbed their walls while they slept. We set their city to flame. We didn't take prisoners that night, because Genghis had given them a choice. From there, the campaign widened. We stormed Karakoto, Yinchuan, and countless smaller settlements. Places once wrapped in silk, stone now reduced to whispers and ash. But here's what few understand. He didn't burn everything, not when he didn't have to, when a city surrendered quickly. He left its markets intact, its scholars, its artisans, sometimes. He even left the rulers in place, under oath to him, because Genghis didn't want destruction. He wanted order. I remember a moment clearly. We stood on a dune, watching prisoners dig a canal. A young boy no older than 10 stumbled in the sand. His captor raised a whip. Genghis caught it mid-air. "No one beats a child in my name," he said, and that was the end of it. After weeks of siege, we reached Yinchuan. Capital, it was a mountain of gold and pride, towers wrapped in silk banners, walls thick as ancient trees. They thought we would try to scale it. Instead, we did something else. We flooded it, diverted a nearby river straight into the city's base, day by day, until the foundations wept and the walls cracked like dry skin. When they surrendered, they didn't cry for mercy. They cried for understanding. Why would a nomad, a man of the wind and horse, wage war with such precision? And Genghis answered them, simply, because you think the world is yours alone. The Western Shia bent the knee. They offered tribute, hostages, trade. The emperor himself called Genghis Celestial Khan, the first time a foreign king. Bowed to our steppe-born sovereign, but Genghis made no fanfare of it. He simply turned to me and said, "One gate has opened. The next will be larger." And I knew where his eyes had turned. To the east, the mighty Jin dynasty. And beyond that, a song. To the west, the Khwarezmian Empire, glimmering with gold and arrogance. To Temujin, to Genghis Khan. These were not lands. They were puzzles waiting to be solved. We left Western Shia not as raiders, but as architects with maps, with diplomats, with engineers taken into our ranks. We didn't just ride home. We rode into the future, and as our army crested the dunes, returning north, Genghis said something I would never forget. Let them call me barbarian. Let them call me ghost. Let them call me devil. So long as they know I am coming. The Chinese call their land the Middle Kingdom, the center of the world, a place of porcelain, silk, scholars, cities the size of empires. To them, we were dust, wind, noise, but wind cuts, dust blinds, and noise becomes thunder. Genghis Khan had tested his blade in the sands of Western Shah. Now he wanted to see how deep it could cut, so he turned east, toward the Jin dynasty, a dynasty with fortresses instead of tents, libraries instead of legends, and a million soldiers behind its walls. To most men, it would seem suicide. To Genghis, it was just the next page. I was there when he laid out the plan on animal hides. We weren't just marching into battle. We were challenging time itself, the weight of tradition, bureaucracy, kingdoms that thought they could last forever simply because they had walls. He said, "They believe they are the dragon, but dragons sleep, I do not." The Jin ruled from Zhengdu, present-day Beijing, a city of stone walls, gold-roofed palaces, and guarded gates thicker than tree trunks. But to reach Zhengdu, we had to go through dozens of border garrisons. So that's what we did, one by one. Our army didn't march in one block. It flowed like a river splitting into streams. Fast raiding units struck towns from the north. Others came from the west. Some pretended to retreat, only to circle back and attack from behind. They called it Mongol madness. We called it Tuesday. The Jin fought hard. They had siege weapons, elite troops, massive crossbows the size of oxen. But what they didn't have was Genghis. He did not just attack, he learned. He captured engineers and made them build counter-siege weapons. He turned prisoners into guides. He paid informants with silver, not threats. And he never repeated the same tactic twice. We crossed the Yellow River. During winter, the ice cracked beneath our horses. Men froze in their saddles still. We moved because Temujin did not stop, so neither did we. By the time we reached Zhengzhou, the city gates had already closed. Its people stood behind its towering walls, watching the horizon like villagers, waiting for a storm they prayed would pass them by. But this storm didn't pass. It circled, it studied, then devoured. We cut off the city's supply lines. We poisoned their wells. We catapulted dead animals over the walls to spread plague and panic. Every night, fires burned along the perimeter, not to attack, but to remind them, you are not safe. Inside the city, the emperor trembled. He offered tribute, gold, daughters, horses. Genghis nodded, then sent back half his army, and kept the other half right outside Zhengdu's walls, waiting, watching, because this wasn't just a war. This was a lesson. You don't buy peace with trinkets. You earn it, or you lose everything. Months passed, Zhengdu starved. Its guards fought each other for scraps. Its nobles begged for help from other cities. None came. Eventually, the gates creaked open, and we walked in. No siege, no final battle, just collapse. Genghis did not destroy the city. He took it, and in doing so, took something greater than gold. He took the myth of Jin invincibility and shattered it like glass. He allowed scholars to live, took their books, their engineers, their astrologers. He absorbed their maps, their languages, their tax systems. He didn't burn the world, he rewired it. When we rode out, the Mongol Empire was no longer just a dream. It was a machine, moving, learning, growing. I asked him that night, while sharpening, "My blade, was this the war you wanted?" He stared into the coals of the fire, then said, "No, this was the start of the war one need, because now the world knew his name. But the world had not yet felt his wrath. That would come next, in the west, in Khwarezm, where arrogance would meet. Annihilation. Some men destroy cities with fire. Genghis Khan destroyed empires with insult, and all it took was one foolish sultan. The Khwarezmian Empire was vast, stretching from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf. Rich, urban, sophisticated. They had scholars, libraries, silk roads that pulsed with gold and philosophy, and one ruler at the center of it all, Sultan Muhammad II. He was a man of pride, cloaked in jewels, flanked by generals, convinced of one thing, that no one could touch him, not even a Mongol. But Genghis Khan didn't want war. Not at first. He wanted peace, trade, connection the Mongol Empire had absorbed. Chinese engineers, Muslim astrologers, Christian scribes, and Temujin wanted more. So he sent a caravan westward, 400 camels, dozens of merchants, chests of silver, bolts of silk, engraved letters of goodwill written in gold leaf. He even addressed the Sultan as equal. It was not submission, it was respect. And the Sultan? He saw weakness when the caravan arrived at Otrar, a border city. The local governor accused the merchants of espionage. He arrested them, then killed them. Every last one. He took the gold and kept the camels. Word reached Genghis quickly. Still, he didn't rage. He sent 3 envoys, a Mongol, a Muslim, and a Chinese, with a message to the Sultan himself. Hand over your governor, or face consequences. A fair warning, an offer of peace. Once more, the Sultan. He beheaded the Muslim envoy, shaved the Mongol's beard, a deep insult, and sent the 3rd home alive. To deliver the message, if you want war, Khan, come find it. So we did. Genghis didn't respond with curses. He responded with 200,000 men. It was the largest army the Mongol Empire had ever assembled. A storm of cavalry, siege, weapons, engineers, scouts, and translators, speaking half the languages of the known world, and united by one purpose: vengeance. I remember his voice before we crossed into Khwarazm territory. They killed merchants. They insulted peace. So, now we will teach them what silence costs. He struck in winter from 3 directions. No one expected it. While the Khwarezmian generals bickered over how to defend the empire's cities, Genghis had already crossed the mountains and taken half their northern forts. We burned Otrar, the city where the caravan died. We captured the governor alive. Genghis asked if he felt remorse. The man spat. So Genghis poured molten silver down his throat. That was not cruelty. That was message. He moved fast. Faster than anyone thought possible. Cities like Bukhara and Samarkand, centers of Islamic art and learning, fell not through siegecraft, but through psychological warfare. Before attacking, Genghis released captured soldiers into the cities. Men missing ears, missing eyes, missing hope. He let them tell their stories. Terror did the rest. Walls opened, forts crumbled, people surrendered before we even struck. When Samarkand finally resisted, he ordered it leveled. He let survivors live, but only the artisans, engineers, and scholars. The rest vanished into the dust. Sultan Muhammad fled from city to city, disguised, humiliated. Once the ruler of millions, now a man without a roof, he ran to the sea, then to the mountains, then, finally, to nothing. When we found him, he had died of disease. In rags, no crown, no guard, no grave with a name, just wind and silence. But Genghis wasn't done. He ordered his sons to chase the Sultan's heirs across the desert, across rivers, across the far corners of Persia. He wanted the world to know, if you betray the Mongol banner, if you kill envoys, there is no border wide enough, no mountain high enough, no city thick enough. To save you, we destroyed Merv, Nishapur, Herat, not as random cruelty, but as calculated examples. And always, before the fires, came the same message. You had a chance. You chose pride. Now, choose ashes. Some called it massacre. Others called it justice. But I saw it for what it was. The breaking of an old world. The birth of something terrifying. Something inevitable. One night, I asked him, was this the war you wanted? He looked at the stars and replied, no, this is the war they chose. And the earth remembered even now. The deserts of Central Asia whisper with ghosts. They don't ask why the empire fell. They ask, why didn't we listen? We had broken the Khwarezmian Empire. Cities burned, thrones collapsed, the map itself had changed. But Genghis Khan was not satisfied. His eyes turned westward, beyond the Caspian Sea, where strange tongues were spoken and armored knights sat. on tall horses, drunk on wine and pride. They had never heard of him. They would. The Khan summoned two men, Subutai and Jeeb, warriors forged in fire, thinkers, killers, wolves. He gave them 20,000 horsemen, not an army to conquer, but a probe to test the world. And he gave them a single order. Ride west, learn everything, burn. What must be burned, leave the rest in fear. I rode with them part of the way. We crossed the Caucasus Mountains, where the air froze the lungs and cliffs sliced the sky. We faced tribes of warriors with long hair and sharpened axes. We beat them. We faced fortresses built into rock, carved over centuries. We broke them. We met Christian knights, speaking in strange tongues, wearing heavy iron. We outran them. Subutai was the mind. Jeeb was the edge. Together, they were a storm no one saw coming. They didn't just win with swords. They won with silence. They disguised their numbers, moved by night, laid false trails, divided forces to look small, then crushed pursuers with ambushes. Kings sent armies to trap them, and Subutai let them come, then surrounded them. At the battle of the Kalka River, the princes of Kiev and Rus gathered their might. Thousands of men from across Eastern Europe. They thought they had the advantage. They thought wrong. We pretended to retreat. A long, painful, humiliating retreat over weeks. The Rus followed, confident, eager for blood. They never saw the trap. On the banks of the Kalka, our full force reappeared from the hills. The knights were crushed. Survivors were captured. The princes were executed, not with blades, but with humiliation. We laid them beneath wooden boards, then threw a feast on top. They died slowly, crushed under the weight of the meal. Let their final breath feed our next campaign. Subutai said, but we did not stay. We didn't conquer Kiev, or Poland, or Hungary. Not yet. We rode back through the steppes, fast, silent, vanishing like smoke. Why? Because this wasn't conquest. It was calculation. We learned their strengths and their weaknesses. We mapped every river, noted every fortress, counted their knights, watched their reactions. Genghis didn't just want their land. He wanted to know them better than they knew themselves. Back in Karakorum, Genghis Khan listened silently to every report. When Subutai finished, the Khan said only, "The West is fat. It walks in armor, drunk on tradition when the time is right. We'll carve through it like meat." But he was patient. He did not rush westward. He sent diplomats, letters, gifts, and in those gifts, he wrapped warnings. Some kings laughed. They shouldn't have, because now the whole world had heard the name, Genghis Khan, but few understood what it meant. Not yet. I remember one night, as we sat under the stars, Subutai whispered to me, "They have towers. They have kings, but they've never met a man who can turn the sky into a blade." And I realized something terrifying. We weren't chasing glory. We were building a map of fear, a list, and one by one, the names on that list would vanish. Old men build temples. Genghis Khan built storms. And even in the last years of his life, with his empire stretching from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea, he did not rest, because rest was for the dead. And Genghis Khan, though aging, scarred, weary, still had one more campaign left in him. It began with betrayal. The Tangut people of Western Shia, once conquered, once obedient, began to defy orders. They withheld tribute, ignored summons, refused to send soldiers for the Khan's foreign wars. They believed he was old, wounded, distracted by distant borders. They thought he would forget, but Genghis never forgot, not disloyalty, and never a debt. He gathered his generals. Many were sons now. Joki, Chagatai, Ogadei, Tolui, warriors forged in his shadow, each one fierce, proud, eager to claim their own legacy. And I stood among them, Older, quieter, but still his shadow. We looked at the map one last time. He pointed south. The Tangut made their choice, he said. Now they'll learn the price. This campaign felt different. There were no fireworks. No fire-lit speeches. No promises of glory. Just movement, quiet precision. The army that marched with Genghis was as brutal as ever, but leaner. Fewer men, more veterans, more engineers, more ghosts. We stormed through Tangut lands like the final breath of winter. Towns fell, fortresses broke, armies shattered. The Tangut sent envoys to beg for mercy. He sent them back alive and gave them time. Time to watch the world die then. The Khan fell ill. It started as a fever, then pain in his bones, then in his chest. Some said it was the wound from a fall. Off his horse. Others whispered darker things. Poison, curses, betrayal. But I knew better. It wasn't death chasing him. It was time. And still. He fought. He commanded from a litter, raised on poles between horses. His voice grew hoarse. His breath shallow. But his orders came sharp, unshaken. Burn the fields. Spare the engineers. Tear down the temples. Leave the people. Let them learn to kneel, or learn to vanish. One day, he called me into his tent. The air was thick. He lay on a bed of furs, sweat beading his brow. I knelt beside him. He didn't speak at first, just stared at the tent's ceiling. Then finally, did I do enough? I didn't answer. What do you say to the man who changed the world? Instead, I asked, what do you fear? He closed his eyes. That they forget, that all this becomes dust and myth. He made me swear that his burial would be secret, that no monument would mark his grave. Let my bones rest with the wind. Let my story live in the blood. And then, the Tangut capital fell. The emperor, dragged in chains before Genghis, begged for mercy. There was none, not for betrayal. Genghis Khan watched their city burn from a hilltop. It was his final conquest. Soon after, the fire left his eyes. He died. Without ceremony, no trumpets, no priests, just silence. We wept in secret, buried him in the night, and followed his orders. No one knows where his grave lies. Some say his horse trampled the earth above it. Some say a river was diverted to cover it. Some say the men who buried him were killed to protect the secret. But I was there, and I can tell you this. He is gone, but never lost. His empire would stretch for decades more. His sons would fight, his generals would conquer. His laws would spread like wildfire through nations that had never seen the steppe, but there would never be another like him. Sometimes at night, I still hear the hooves. I smell the smoke, feel the frost, see the eyes of a boy by a dying fire. The world will remember him as a conqueror, a tyrant, a genius, a demon, a god. But I remember the boy who said, if I rise, you rise with me. And I did. My name was never carved in stone, but I was his sword, his shadow, his friend, and this is how it all began. Genghis Khan died without a monument. No statue, no stone, no golden tomb, only a silence so vast. It stretched from the Pacific to the edge of Europe. But silence is not the same as forgetting, because the world could never forget him. After his death, the empire did not collapse. It expanded like lungs taking a deeper breath, like a wave rolling. Faster, heavier, his sons, Joki, Chagatai, Agaday, and Tolui each took pieces of the storm and turned them into fire. And under his grandson Kublai, the Mongols would go on to rule all of China. Under Hulagu, they would burn Baghdad and break the Islamic Golden Age. Under Beta, they would strike terror into the heart of Europe itself. Cities fell, borders redrawn, languages blended. Silk roads became highways of iron law and steady coin. People feared the Mongols, but many also thrived under them, because Genghis Khan's rule was brutal. Yes, But it was also fair. He outlawed torture, established postal systems faster than any before, insisted on religious tolerance across a dozen faiths, appointed generals based not on blood, but on brilliance, and he did what no emperor before him ever dared. He stitched the East to the West with order. His face was never carved into a coin, his name never written by his own hand. But still, the world changed, not because of his armies, because of his vision. Even today, his blood runs through the veins of millions. Even now, his name echoes in 100 languages. And every time a merchant crosses a border without fear, every time a leader is judged not by birth, but by merit, every time an empire thinks it cannot fall, Genghis Khan is watching. They say history is written by the victors, but he didn't just win. He rewrote the rules in me. I'm long gone, a whisper in a shadow, but I remember. I remember the boy in the snow, hunting fish with bare hands. I remember the teenager who swore he would never starve again. I remember the man who rode against cities, kings, and fate itself. He didn't chase death. He outran it. You call him conqueror, Khan, terror, visionary. But I knew him before the world did. And I know this. He wasn't born to follow the wind. He was born to command it. This was his story. I was just the shadow. But the storm was real. When Genghis Khan died, the earth did not shake. There were no omens, no thunder, no falling stars, only silence. And in that silence, the world waited, because while the man was gone, the storm he created was not. He left behind more. Than land, he left behind a question. Who rules the storm? Genghis had 4 sons. Joki, the eldest, strong, proud, distant Chagatai, the strict one, a man of law and sharp judgment, Agade the third, calm, diplomatic, cunning, Tolui, the youngest, fire-blooded, brutal in battle, loyal to the end. Each had led armies. Each had earned scars in their father's name, but none of them were Genghis. And he knew that. So before his death, he made his final choice. He chose Agade, not the strongest, not the firstborn, but the one who could hold it together. Some say Agade wept when he was named, not out of pride, but fear, because he knew what the world would ask of him. I was there when the great Kurotai was called. The council of warlords, generals, and princes from every corner of the empire. They gathered in the Orkhon Valley. The banners of the Mongols fluttered in the wind like black wings. Some came to support, others came to scheme, but all came knowing one thing. If the wrong Khan rose now, the empire would fall into civil war. Agade stood before them, silver-haired, soft-spoken, but sharp as ice. He said nothing of glory. He spoke only of continuity. My father broke the world, he said. Now I will hold its pieces together. And they voted, not with fear, but with memory. They remembered what Genghis wanted. So Agade became Kagan, great Khan of the Mongol Empire. And the storm moved again, but peace was not guaranteed. Chagatai still seethed with pride. Joki, the oldest, had died before Genghis, but his son Beta now ruled in the west, and Tolui, though loyal, held the empire's core, the Mongol heartland, and an army that could tip any balance. So, Agade ruled carefully. He honored Chagatai with his own territory, Central Asia, the Chagatai Khanate. He let Tolui govern Mongolia itself, the sacred homeland, and he allowed Bata to expand westward into the lands of the Rus and beyond. Each brother had a piece, but only Agade had the seal, the right to command all. And what did he do with that power? He built. He raised a capital, Karakorum, from the bones of the steppe. He minted coins, built roads, expanded the Yam, the legendary Mongol postal relay system, allowing messages to cross the empire faster than any army. He enforced laws, the Yasa, equally across all peoples, regardless of their gods or blood. He didn't ride for conquest like his father, but he prepared for it. He saw something Genghis never did, that an empire could not just conquer with the sword. It had to rule with structure still. The sword was never far, and Ogedei had no illusions. He knew that peace could only last if the empire stayed feared. So when word came that Beatty and Sabbatai were ready to march west, he gave them his blessing, and with it, a war unlike anything Europe had ever seen. But not all battles were fought with blades. Inside the court, women like Trejin Katan, Ogedei's wife, were shaping politics behind the veils. And one woman, Sorgatani, widow of Tolui and mother of Kublai, was watching everything, quiet, wise, dangerous. She whispered to her sons, "Learn, listen, the storm is not over. It is only changing shape." Years passed. Ogedei grew older. He drank heavily, too. Heavily, his health failed, and before he could name a clear successor, he died. Suddenly, in the winter of 1241, and just like that, the empire paused. The great westward invasion, already tearing through Poland and Hungary, was halted. Not by enemy swords, but by the death of a Khan. Subutai turned back. Beta withdrew his armies, and the Kurultai was called once more. But this time, there was no clear choice, only factions, intrigue, and women sharper than generals. Ogedei had held the storm, but now the storm would choose its own direction, and this time the winds would not be kind. The maps of Europe had dragons at their edges. Here, they warned, be monsters. But the Mongols weren't monsters. They were men. Men with discipline. Men with purpose. Men who carried the storm on their backs. And in the year 1236, that storm began to move west. Beta, grandson of Genghis, took the lead. Broad-shouldered, hard-eyed, a prince of Joki's blood. But the mind behind the thunder was Sabbatai, the old wolf, general of generals, a man who had ridden farther than Alexander, faster than Caesar. He didn't conquer. He calculated together. They led over 130,000 men, the finest cavalry the world had ever seen. Not just Mongols, but Turks, Tatars, Chinese engineers, Muslim scouts, even Russian defectors. It was not an army, it was a machine. And Europe was unprepared. Their first target, the Volga Bulgars, a kingdom of merchants and warriors on the edge of the steppe, they fell like grass. Then came Ryazan. The Mongols demanded submission. Ryazan refused, so the city was surrounded, burned, its people slaughtered. Its princes tied to siege engines and used as shields. One survivor was sent east to warn others. The sky is falling. Then came Moscow, Vladimir, Suzdal, each a proud city, each crushed beneath hooves. But the Mongols weren't conquering, not. Yet they were testing. They split into multiple forces, striking from unexpected angles. One group appeared in Poland, another in Hungary. When European nobles tried to rally, they found themselves surrounded before they could finish dressing. At Legnitz, Polish, German, and Templar knights gathered, confident in their armor, their crosses, their banners. They were met by silence. Then arrows, then a thunder of hooves. The knights were slaughtered, their skulls piled like trophies. At Mohi, in Hungary, King Bela IV brought an army of 100,000 knights, peasants, mercenaries. Sabbatai led the Mongol response personally. He used riverbanks, bridges, smoke, and silence. He crushed them with strategy, not just force. The Hungarian army was annihilated. The king fled barefoot. Europe panicked. Church bells rang for prayers. Papal messengers called for crusades. People whispered that the Antichrist had come. But the Mongols didn't press forward. They paused, and then they vanished. Why? Because far away, in Karakorum, Ogedei Khan was dead, and Mongol law demanded that all princes return to elect a new Kagan. Even conquest bowed to tradition. So Bata and Sabbatai turned east. They had brought Europe to its knees. but they were not finished. I remember Sabitai's words as he left the Danube behind. We now know their roads, their walls, their fears. Next time, we won't knock. Europe breathed a sigh of relief, but they misunderstood. The Mongols hadn't retreated. They were simply taking notes, and the storm? It waited. The rivers of Europe ran red. The smoke of Ryazan, Kiev, Krakow, and Buda had barely faded. And still, the West didn't understand what had struck them. They called it the Tartar curse, the scourge of God, the end of days. But the storm that had shattered their world had stopped not from defeat, not from mercy, but because of tradition. Far to the east, Genghis Khan, son of Genghis, ruler of the largest empire the world had ever known, was dead. And in Mongol law, that meant everything paused. No wars, no conquest, no diplomacy, until a new Khagan was chosen. And so, from the shores of the Danube to the frozen steppes of Mongolia, the princes of the empire turned back. Europe was left bruised, bleeding, breathless, like a man who had nearly drowned. And the Mongols? They returned to Karakorum to fight over a different kind of battlefield, a battlefield of succession. Bata Khan, who had led the westward campaign, was the obvious choice to some. He had blooded Europe. He had ruled the Golden Horde in his father Joki's name. But Beta didn't want the throne, or perhaps he knew it would never be given to him, because behind him stood a shadow. Trezhin Khaton. Trezhin was Ogeday's widow, and while the men had ridden for war, she had ruled from behind veils and whispered promises. When Ogeday died, she seized the imperial seal, dismissed her husband's ministers, installed her own loyal men and women, and she did one thing above all. Stalled for 5 long years, she delayed the election of the next Khan. Why? Because she wanted her son, Guyuk, to wear the crown, and she succeeded in 1246. After endless debate, bribes, and threats, Guyuk was named Khagan, a cold man, a drinker like his father, but without Ogeday's charm, a man who wore the throne. Like armor, defensive, insecure, angry. At his coronation, emissaries from Persia, Europe, even the Pope arrived. They came hoping for peace. They left with fear. Because Guyuk made one thing clear: the world does not send kings to the Mongols. The world kneels, but Beta did not kneel. He refused to attend the coronation, stayed in the West, building cities, alliances, and strength. And soon, the tension between Bata and Guyuk threatened to tear the empire in two. Then, suddenly, Guyuk died on the road no one knew how. Some said sickness, others whispered poison. Beta said nothing, but I remember his smile. Once again, the throne was empty, and this time, a different queen stepped forward, Sorgatani, widow of Tolui, mother of Manadi, and aunt to Kublai, where Trezhin ruled with steel veiled in silk. Sorgatani ruled with wisdom and timing. She had waited in the shadows for decades. Now she moved. In 1251, after much maneuvering, Mondi Khan was elected. It was not just a new reign, it was a new dynasty. Because Mondi wasn't a son of Ogeday, he was the son of Tolui, and that changed everything. Now, the center of power shifted, and with it, the storm stirred once more. Under Manji, the Mongol Empire would resume its fury. To the south, in China, Kublai would begin the conquest of the Song dynasty. To the west, in Persia and the Arab world, Hulagu would prepare to march on Baghdad. And in Europe, the kingdom still trembled, for they knew the Mongols had not forgotten. I still remember a monk from France, visiting Karakorum after the coronation. He asked, "Will you return to our lands?" Mondi smiled and said, "You are alive because we allow it." The thunder on the Danube had stopped, but in the distance, it was building again. They say the Mongol Empire was built by horsemen, but they forget the ones behind the curtain, the ones who never held a sword, yet commanded thousands. The ones who shaped thrones with whispers, not war cries. The ones who wore silk, but ruled like iron. This is their chapter. The women of the empire, there were many. Queens, concubines, regents, but two stood taller than the rest. Temujin Khan, wife of Genghis Khan, and Sorgatani Beki, wife of Tolui, enemies, mirror images. And the two most powerful women of their generation. Temujin was sharp-eyed, ambitious and unrelenting. When Agade died, she took control of the court like a hawk claiming the sky. No one dared oppose her. Not generals, not governors, not even the sons of Genghis himself. She dismissed her husband's ministers, replaced them with her own loyalists, mostly women from her household, and ruled the empire for 5 years. But she didn't rule for herself. She ruled for her son, Guyuk. He was her legacy, her weapon, her chance to make the empire hers forever. Across the empire, from the smoky plains of Mongolia to the palaces of Samarkand, Temujin's orders were law. She negotiated trade with Persia, ordered sieges, issued decrees in the name of the future Kagan. She was not a puppet. She was Canis in all but name. But power built on ambition is brittle. And across the valley, another woman watched. Waited Sorgatani. She had no army, no palace, only 4 sons. But those sons would shape history. Mondi, the future great Khan. Kublai, emperor of China. Hulagu, destroyer of Baghdad. Arik Bekai, the storm that would divide the empire. Sorgatani did not scheme with anger. She schemed with patience. She whispered to generals, made allies among religious minorities. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, all treated equally. Under Mongol law, she sent her sons to learn not just war, but governance. She taught them to speak multiple languages, to understand multiple faiths, to rule over a world larger than the steppe, while Temujin tried to force the world. Sorgatani prepared to inherit it, and when Guyuk died, suddenly and without warning, Temujin's power collapsed like a tent with its poles kicked out. She had no allies, no fallback, and the same courtiers who once bowed to her disappeared. It was Sorgatani's turn, and she moved swiftly. She rallied the princes of the house of Tolui, gathered support from Baita in the west, and when the Kurultai was called again, she presented her son, Mondi, not just as heir to Tolui's blood, but as heir to Genghis's vision. Mondi was elected unanimously. Temujin's line was cut from power, and the empire belonged to the house of Sorgatani. But Sorgatani didn't rule from behind a throne. She didn't need to. Her sons were. The throne, and they remembered everything she taught them. She died in peace, in her bed. In her 60s old, by Mongol standards, her funeral was quiet, but her legacy would shake the earth, and still, she was not alone. Across the Mongol world, women held power others could not imagine. They controlled trade, negotiated peace between rival khans, governed cities during wartime, led diplomacy with Europe and the Hio. Middle East, some even led armies in the absence of their husbands. Because in Mongol law, women were not shadows, they were the spine. In Europe, they feared the horde. In Persia, they feared the wrath. But in the heart of the empire, it was the women who held the reins. The thunder had moved west, then gone silent. But in the east, it stirred again, not with fire, not with arrows, but with something stranger, something older, China. When Genghis Khan first struck the Chinese kingdoms, it was with fury. He saw their wealth, their gold, silk, scholars, and walls, and sought to shatter it. But Genghis never conquered it all. He died before the last Chinese stronghold. The Song dynasty could be broken. The task fell to his descendants, and one of them, a tall, intelligent grandson named Kublai, would take more than just cities. He would take a civilization. Kublai was not like the other Mongol princes. He didn't crave battle for its own sake. He listened more than he spoke. Read Chinese poetry. learned the Confucian classics, surrounded himself with scholars and monks of Vengenself. Every religion, Taoist, Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, he saw something his grandfather never had time to see. You can conquer with fear, but to rule, you must understand. Kublai was sent to China by his brother Genghis Khan. In the early 1250s, officially, he was just a governor. Unofficially, he was laying the foundation for a new kind of empire. He didn't burn cities. He rebuilt them. He didn't slaughter officials. He hired them. And though his soldiers still rode with thunder, his rule began to look Chinese. Some Mongols whispered that he was going soft, that silk and scrolls were dulling his edge, that his father's blood was growing thin in him. But Kublai didn't care, because while they clung to tradition, he was building a vision then. In 1259, Genghis Khan died during a siege in the south, and once again the empire fractured. Kublai in the east, his brother Arik Beki. In the Mongol heartland, each claimed the title of Great Khan, each called a Kurultai, each crowned himself, and the greatest civil war in Mongol history began. Kublai's war wasn't just fought on horseback, it was fought in identity. Would the empire stay Mongol, wild, nomadic, steppeland-born? Or would it become something else? Rooted, settled, imperial, Chinese? After 4 years of bitter struggle, Kublai won, but in winning, he lost something. The empire was never whole again. The West, the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, now ruled themselves. The unity of Genghis Khan's storm was broken, but from its pieces, Kublai built something new. In 1271, he declared the birth of the Yuan dynasty. He didn't just rule China, he became its emperor, and in 1279, he finished what Genghis had begun. The Song dynasty, the last resistance in southern China, was crushed. The Chinese court was dragged north in chains. The rivers turned red with history, and for the first time in thousands of years, all of China was under foreign rule. Kublai made Beijing his capital, built palaces, courts, canals, granaries, temples, and from there, he ruled the largest continuous empire the world has ever seen. But he was no longer just a Khan, he was a Chinese emperor, and that came with a price. He passed laws that alienated Mongol nobles, lost touch with the steppe, relied more on ministers than warriors. He tried to invade Japan twice and failed both times. And though his empire glittered, his bloodline weakened. The storm no longer roared, it rained. Kublai died in 1294, heavy with grief, gout, and the ghosts of a world he tried to reshape. Some say he died in peace. Others say he died wondering whether he had betrayed the legacy of Genghis. But I think he died knowing this. I did not inherit the world. I rebuilt it. The dream of a world empire faded. But in China, the Yuan dynasty remained for a while, and in history, Kublai would be remembered not as a destroyer, but as a bridge between East and West, between nomad and emperor, between storm and state. If Kublai dreamed of cities, Hulagu dreamed of fire. He was the third son of Tolui and Sorgatani, brother to Mandi and Kublai, and he carried their ambition in his bones. But while Kublai turned east, Hulagu turned south, to Persia, to Mesopotamia, to Baghdad, the jewel of Islam, the house of wisdom, the heart of an ancient world. The command came from Genghis Khan himself, a new campaign, one to crush the final pockets of resistance in the Islamic West, to destroy the assassins, that secret order of mountain killers, and after them, the Abbasid Caliphate. Hulagu raised an army larger than any Mongol general had commanded before. Not just Mongols, but Chinese engineers, Persian auxiliaries, Christian warriors from Georgia and Armenia. The world had never seen such a force. They called it the Tumen of Tumens, 100,000 strong. and it moved like a tide of iron. First, the assassins, the mysterious Nizari sect, hidden in castles perched on impossible cliffs. Their dagger had reached kings, but even they could not reach the Mongols. Hulagu surrounded their fortresses, starved them out, one by one. Their towers fell, until finally, at Alamet, their Grand Master surrendered, and centuries of shadows vanished into the dust. Then, Hulagu turned his gaze on Baghdad. The Caliph, al-Mustasim, ruled in the name of Islam, but his court was divided, his army unprepared, his vision clouded by arrogance. He believed Baghdad was too holy to fall. He believed the Mongols would show mercy. He believed wrong. In January 1258, the Mongols arrived at the gates of the city. They dammed the Tigris River, built siege engines with Chinese skill, and surrounded Baghdad with silence. Then came the bombardment. Stones, fire, iron. The city cracked like an egg, and on February 10th, it fell. What followed was not war, it was annihilation. The Mongols poured into the streets. They slaughtered soldiers, citizens, clerics, children. They burned libraries that had stood for centuries. Books turned to ash, knowledge lost to wind. The House of Wisdom, the greatest center of science and philosophy in the Islamic world, was reduced to rubble. Some say the blood of the slain ran ankle-deep through the alleys. Some say the Tigris ran black with ink from ruined scrolls. Caliph was captured. He begged for mercy. He offered gold, loyalty, tribute, but the Mongols had a rule: never spill royal blood, so they wrapped him in a carpet and trampled him under horses. Just like that, the Abbasid Caliphate, which had ruled for 500 years, was gone. Hulagu installed puppet rulers in its place. He sent word to Manji: the crescent is broken, the city is yours. But Hulagu wasn't done. He pushed west, toward Syria and the Mamluks of Egypt. And there, he would meet something the Mongols hadn't seen in decades: defeat. At the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260, the Mongols were finally stopped. Hulagu had withdrawn east, leaving a smaller force behind. The Mamluks, fierce warriors on fast horses, many once slaves, used Mongol tactics against them. And for the first time, the Mongols lost. It was a turning point. The advance into Africa was over, and the Mongol aura of invincibility was cracked. Still, the damage was done. Baghdad never recovered. Islamic civilization shifted to Cairo, to Samarkand, to Istanbul. But the golden age of Baghdad? Extinguished. Hulagu returned to Persia, where he founded the Ilkhanate, a Mongol kingdom of the Middle East. He ruled it until his death, married a Christian queen, welcomed philosophers and astronomers, built observatories and courts. He was both destroyer and builder, like his grandfather, like the storm. And when he died, they buried him in a mountain tomb, not far from the cities he had burned, not far from the empires he had broken. The stars still shine over Baghdad, but if you listen, in the dark, you might still hear the gallop of hooves. The empire that Genghis Khan had carved across continents was once a single breath, a storm moving as one. But storms break, lightning splits, and the Mongol Empire shattered into 4 great khanates, each ruled by one of Genghis's descendants, each forging their own path through history. The Golden Horde, to the northwest, founded by Batu Khan, son of Joki. It ruled the vast plains of Russia, Ukraine, and Eastern Europe, known for swift raids, collecting tribute, and influencing the rise and fall of Russian princes, the Chagatai. Khanate in Central Asia, named after Genghis's son Chagatai, a land of harsh deserts and towering mountains, a realm where Mongol warriors met Turkic cultures, sometimes clashing, sometimes blending. The Ilkhanate in Persia and the Middle East, born from Hulag's conquests, where the ruins of Baghdad gave way to new cities, new courts, and new alliances with Muslim, Christian, and Buddhist subjects. The Yuan dynasty in China and Mongolia, The domain of Kublai Khan, an empire that was no longer just Mongol. It was a fusion of nomads and scholars, horsemen and mandarins. The four khanates were bound by blood, but divided by vision. They often competed, sometimes clashed, rarely reunited. Each adapted, each survived. The Golden Horde learned to rule through diplomacy and tribute, influencing Moscow's rise. The Chagatai Khanate became a crossroads of cultures. Even as it struggled with internal strife, the Ilkhanate embraced Persian culture, converting to Islam and patronizing the arts. The Yuan dynasty built a sprawling bureaucracy, blending Mongol and Chinese traditions. But the unity of Genghis's dream was gone. Instead of one great storm, there were four smaller ones, sometimes fierce, sometimes fading. Yet each carried a part of the original fire, and the world changed because of it. Trade routes flourished under Mongol protection. The Silk Road thrived like never before. Ideas, goods, and technologies traveled faster. And farther, Europe met Asia. East met West. But with power came weakness, succession struggles, rebellions, the plague, and rising enemies. Still, the echoes of the Khanate roared across the centuries, a legacy carved into the lands they ruled. I watched it all, from the throne rooms to the battlefields, from the deserts to the mountains, and I knew the storm had changed form, but it was not over. Empires, like storms, are born in fury. But storms pass, they leave behind only whispers. Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific to the Danube, but by the late 13th and early 14th centuries, it began to crack. Rival Khans fought over succession. Generals betrayed each other. Lands that once bowed began to resist. The Black Death struck. Like a second storm, it tore through cities and steppe alike. Mongol armies, once unstoppable, were decimated. Trade slowed, fear spread. In the Golden Horde, princes fought viciously. Moscow grew stronger, casting off Mongol yoke. In Persia, the Ilkhanate collapsed under internal strife and plague. In China, the Yuan dynasty struggled with famine and rebellion. The unity Genghis Khan forged with blood and iron was gone, but his legacy lived on. In the laws Mongols wrote, the Yasa, we see the roots of order. In the tolerance they showed to conquered peoples, seeds of pluralism. In the roads and trade, roots they built, the first threads of a connected world, even in fear. The name Mongol echoed for centuries. From the castles of Europe to the deserts of Arabia, a warning, a memory, and in the blood of nations. The Turkic peoples, the Russians, the Chinese, the Persians, all carry traces of the Mongol storm. In their language, in their culture, in their bones. I was there. I saw the fire, the thunder, the calm after the storm, and though the empire faded, the storm was never gone. It changed, it lived on, in stories, in empires yet to come. Because Genghis Khan did not just conquer lands, he conquered history itself.